Mark Rogers TV and Last Word on Sports, bringing you my analysis of the college football playoff rankings, the initial release. So we saw the rankings released just a few minutes ago. I will run down my rankings and also run down some perceptions I have in regards to analysis and comparison of teams. So first of all, I consider this more of a merit basis process rather than an eyeball test. We all have our perception on who the best teams are in college football. So, for example, if you were to ask me, select the four best teams in college football, if I had to stake my life or my mortgage on these teams winning crucial games against top opponents, I would put my money, I would put my mortgage on Clemson, LSU, Ohio State, and Alabama. I think they are the four best teams in the country. The College Football Playoff Committee obviously thinks the same thing, and they are tasked to select the four best teams in the country. I think there's a distinction to be made. I would not select the four best teams. I would select the four teams that have earned it. And more of that earning is going to be done over the last 5 weeks of the season than what we've seen thus far, especially from teams like Ohio State and Baylor, who have really yet to meet the bulk of their schedule and the quality opponents. So let me again separate it. I think those are the four best teams in the country based on what I've seen. But I think there's a merit process that should be put in place. Have you earned it? Alabama's lost a game. Now they have the opportunity to defeat some top quality opponents and earn their way into it, especially with other top teams losing across the country. So Alabama, for me, is down in the rankings, not because I don't think they're good enough. It's because that they lost a game. I've heard all sorts of ridiculous claims made today and comparisons and connections made where people talk out of both sides of their mouth. So on one hand, they put down Iowa for having its best win against a Wisconsin team that is 7-2, a pretty good Wisconsin Badgers team. Iowa only beat them by 4 points, and saying Alabama crushed Wisconsin. Well, first of all, Alabama did not crush Wisconsin. It was a really good game until late in the third quarter. Secondly, if you want to make connections like that, then you're also going to say that Alabama at home against a 4-loss Tennessee team needed to take that game down to the wire and was very fortunate to defeat a 4-loss Tennessee team, not a 2-loss Wisconsin team. And Iowa did that on the road at Wisconsin. Also, if you want to connect the dots, how about the Memphis Tigers? And how about Alabama? Memphis won a 2-score game, 13 points over Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat Alabama. Shouldn't Memphis be rated higher than Alabama? So I believe in complete resume. I believe in rewarding teams that have earned it. And even one-loss teams that would be down in my rankings right now certainly have that opportunity, as teams will be beating each other. There's going to be carnage even outside of the teams that have to play each other in the top 25. There are going to be unranked teams that are going to step up in the final weeks and win some games. So for me, it comes down to who did you beat? Who did you lose to? And if you lost a game, how impressive were you in that loss? Did you get drubbed? So out of the one-loss teams, Alabama lost to Ole Miss, close game at home. Notre Dame lost to Clemson. That's probably the most quality loss in the country right now by 2 points on the road. You've got Florida losing at LSU, another quality loss by just 1 score. Stanford lost a game against Northwestern, not looking so great at this point, although Northwestern is fringe top 20 right now, according to myself and the College Football Playoff Committee. Utah with a loss, of course, against USC. The Trojans very talented, but nowhere close to the top 25 right now. Oklahoma would be the Ohio State at this point of 2015, having posted the worst loss of the contending teams against Texas. Florida State with a not-so-good loss against a Georgia Tech team that has lost 5 games as well. So the wins, the losses have to be measured in particular. Also, where did you play these games, and how impressive were you in winning? And if you've got a loss, how competitive was the loss? Okay, again, I make the Alabama comparison against Iowa. with Alabama coming in at number 4. Iowa's at number 9 right now. I believe the Hawkeyes should be rated ahead of the Tide. Again, this doesn't mean that I consider Iowa a better football team than Alabama. I believe that they've earned it based on a perfect record there. While we're on the Hawkeyes, make the comparison between Ohio State and Iowa. Both teams are undefeated. Both teams play in the Big Ten, but they have very little overlap play at this point. Ohio State's got a game with Illinois in a couple weeks. Illinois has played Iowa. There are going to be a few overlapping games. Ohio State, Minnesota this week. Minnesota will play Iowa later in the season, but right now that doesn't exist. What exists is a better schedule for Iowa against particular teams. So I guess if you look at the schedule rankings, you're going to see Iowa rated fairly low in FBS football, taking its entirety of the schedule. But if you take the better teams that they've beaten, it far outweighs Ohio State's resume. Ohio State's best win probably at this point is Penn State. 7-2 Penn State that did not play any quality non-conference games that it won. Penn State, of course, lost to Temple in week 1. For Iowa, they have 3 quality wins, what I would consider quality wins against Pitt 6-2, Northwestern 6-2, and again, that Wisconsin game at 7-2. So Iowa's got 3 quality wins. Ohio State possibly 1 against Penn State. Also, the Clemson resume, not as strong as made out to be. This underlines that we don't have enough quality teams playing each other in non-conference competition. Teams like Baylor, Ohio State to a certain degree since Virginia Tech's down. LSU gets a pass because they play in the SEC, what's considered to be the best conference in college football. But LSU did not play a quality non-conference game. Oklahoma State did not. These teams need to schedule quality non-conference opponents to gain the respect of me, which doesn't mean a whole lot at this point. All right. So for Clemson, let's consider, yes, everybody goes to the Notre Dame game. If we're looking at performance, so as I understand it, the College Football Playoff Committee looks at wins and losses, of course, as they should. They look at the advanced statistics and metrics. They also give it the eyeball test and consider the performance evaluation on the field. Clemson beat Notre Dame, one of the 10 or 12 best teams in the country, at home. They won by 2 points. They stopped a 2-point conversion try to hang on for the victory, and Notre Dame dropped so many passes in that game that would have converted first downs over and over and over. Clemson won the game. Of course, let's credit Clemson. They do have a top resume. I also kind of question the victories against North Carolina State, a marginal team. Louisville, a marginal top 50 team. They barely won those games against North Carolina State and against Louisville. And my ultimate example of trying to evaluate performance versus just looking at the result of the win or the loss. Last Saturday night, Stanford, Washington State, the Cardinal led 30-28. The Cougars came down the field and moved the ball down the field and set up for what would be a game-winning field goal that would have completely damaged Stanford's ability to make a case for the college football playoff. A kicker who had made 5 consecutive field goals missed. Stanford won. Okay, if we're going with a results-based system, then that's all that counts. Stanford won. If this were the NFL, that's all that would matter. Stanford won. If we're going with an evaluation on the field, then it doesn't matter if that kid made the kick or not. Whether that kid has the ability to make a field goal, unless Stanford would have blocked it, has no bearing and no display of Stanford's ability to play football. Stanford had nothing to do with that play. That kid missed a kick. So the performance of Stanford stands regardless of the win or loss. Do you follow me here? Stanford's performance had nothing to do with the Washington State kid missing the kick. If he would have made the kick, it was the same Stanford football team and the same performance. He missed the kick. Stanford won. And we're supposed to be evaluating performance. And to me, that was not a good performance from Stanford. So I'm going to run down my top 16. We could take each team, we could tear it apart, we could go through all sorts of examples. And of course, as the weeks roll through, there are going to be teams that are going to eliminate themselves, others that are going to obviously play themselves into it. And then we're going to have a number of teams on the proverbial college basketball bubble that we're going to have to discuss, i.e., Ohio State, TCU, and Baylor. Not understanding why Alabama and Oregon got a pass last year and were left out of that discussion. Here's my top 16. Please respond to it. Ask your questions, make your comments, and we'll talk about it. So number 16, I made the distinction at number 16 because I've got Michigan at 17. The Wolverines, with 2 losses, I don't believe have a chance to play their way into the college football playoff. I think the committee was kind, considering the Utah loss on the road against a good Utes team, also considering that the Michigan State loss was very difficult and there were extenuating circumstances there, possibly with Michigan and with Florida, or with Michigan State. So I got Florida State. They can still play their way into it. They've got Clemson this week on the road. They can get back into the mix. So I draw the line there. Florida State at 16. Remember, Ohio State at 16 last year in the initial college football playoff standings. Oklahoma 15, Memphis 14, Utah 13, Stanford 12, Notre Dame 11, Alabama 10. I've got Florida 9, Oklahoma State 8, Baylor 7, Ohio State 6, TCU 5, Iowa 4, Michigan State 3, Clemson 2, and I believe LSU has performed the best as an undefeated football team against the best schedule, the best competition, highlighted by that Florida win. And of course, LSU's got the date at Alabama. That will tell us tons. So again, those aren't the best teams necessarily in the country. Those are the teams that have earned it based on who they beat, if they lost, was it a competitive game, where was it played, and the overall performance evaluation of the team. Need to hear from you. Let's talk it up. College football playoff rankings, first edition, right here on Mark Rogers TV.